In the small, bustling town of Agueda, life moved at its own rhythm. The market buzzed, children ran barefoot, and the warm air carried the scent of roasted yam and palm oil. It was here that Nkemdalam, everyone called her Nkem, was growing up. From the age of 7, Nkem's life began to set her apart. While other girls played Sue and Tintin under the mango trees, Kim noticed her body changing. Her chest began to bud earlier than any of her classmates, and she felt a strange new awareness that no one else seemed to share. One evening, as she watched her friend's skipping rope, she tugged at her mother's wrapper. "Mama, why is my body changing already? Am I sick?" Mama Ifioma, a patient woman with deep, knowing eyes, laughed softly. "No, my child. You are healthy. God has decided to make you grow fast. You are special." The word special lodged in Kim's heart like a seed. From that moment, she began to see herself as different, above the ordinary experiences of life, untouchable by the struggles that plagued her friends. When her first menstrual period arrived, it was like the world revealed a secret only girls knew. Her classmates wailed, clutching their stomachs and refusing to go to school. Some stayed home, bent over in discomfort with hot water bottles strapped to their waists. Kim, however, felt nothing at all. Not a twinge, not a cramp, not even the dull ache she'd heard so much about. She watched her friends cry and groan, a mix of amazement and amusement bubbling inside her. Then she laughed, loudly and without shame. Are you all crazy? It's just blood. What's hurting you? You're all so weak," she exclaimed, striding past the girls sprawled on the dusty ground. They glared at her, some with embarrassment, others with envy, but Kim didn't care. She had never known pain, and she couldn't imagine the sensation that made others suffer. Her laughter became her armor, a declaration that she was different, untouchable, strong, and beyond the ordinary. By the age of 10, Kim had earned a reputation in her neighborhood. She was the girl who never cried, the girl who never faltered, and most memorably, the girl who mocked others for their suffering. She carried her pride like a crown. At school, during physical education or the monthly assembly when girls whispered about cramps, Kim's teasing was relentless. "Please, why are you all suffering? Even a small cut hurts you? Me? I don't even know what pain means," she would say, her voice ringing across the courtyard. Some classmates admired her resilience, others resented her. But Kim grew prouder with each glance, each whisper, each sigh of envy or frustration. Pride had become a second skin, inseparable from her being. Even at home, Mama Ifioma watched with quiet worry. She loved her daughter, but she sensed the danger of unchecked pride. "This child is too prideful," she muttered one evening, watching Kim run barefoot across the yard, laughing at the girls who struggled with simple exercises. "If she doesn't learn humility, one day life will humble her very well." But Kim didn't hear. She only saw herself as untouchable, a girl who could rise above it all. She used her unusual resilience as a weapon, teasing her friends with remarks about their weakness, her voice bright and sharp with delight. "Look at you crying. What's hurting you? Me? I've never felt it." Her pride swelled like the golden sun over Agueda Lake, hot, bright, and impossible to ignore. And as she lay at night, staring at the ceiling of her small room, she whispered to herself, "Pain can't reach me. I am special. I am strong. I am untouchable." Little did Kim know, life had been quietly watching her, waiting for the moment when the untouchable girl would meet a pain far greater than she had ever imagined. By the time Kim reached her teenage years, she had blossomed into a striking young woman, tall, slender, with skin like polished ebony and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the lake itself. In Agueda, where the waters of the lake met the whispers of the ancestors, people couldn't speak of beauty without mentioning Kim's name. Her confidence, which had once been seen as childhood arrogance, now looked like regal grace. Boys from her village and neighboring towns would try to catch her eye, but Kim moved through the world with an air of detached superiority. She was not just beautiful, she was the girl who knew no pain, a fact she wore like the most precious jewelry. This invincibility shaped her choices. While other girls worried about heartbreak, Kim saw relationships as a game she was destined to win. She believed she was immune to emotional pain just as she was to physical pain. She dated boys, not for love, but for the admiration they gave her. When they inevitably fell for her, She would end things with a casual shrug, leaving a trail of confused and heartbroken young men behind her. Her friends would warn her, "Kim, you're playing with fire. One day, you will meet someone who will make you feel something." Kim would just laugh. "Feel what? Sadness? Heartbreak? I don't know those things. My heart is as strong as my body." Her pride was a fortress, and inside, she felt completely safe. She couldn't comprehend the tears of her friends over a boy who didn't call back or a love that went unreturned. To her, it was all a sign of weakness, a flaw she was glad she didn't possess. This belief that she was above human suffering made her bold, but it also made her lonely. People admired her from a distance, but few felt they could truly get close to her. She was like a beautiful, perfect statue in the center of the town square. Everyone could see her, but no one could touch her. As Kim grew into a woman, her mother's worries deepened. Mama Ifioma saw a daughter who was becoming a stranger to empathy. "Kim, my child," she would say gently, "a life without pain is a life without lessons. Be careful. The heart that doesn't know how to hurt doesn't know how to love either." But Kim dismissed her mother's words as old-fashioned sentiment. She was Kim, the untouchable, the girl who laughed at pain. She believed her life was destined for greatness, unburdened by the petty sorrows that held everyone else back. She saw her lack of pain not as a condition, but as a gift, a sign of her superiority. She stood on the shores of Agueda Lake, the setting sun painting the water in shades of orange and gold. She felt a surge of triumph. The world was at her feet, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could ever touch her. She was convinced that her future would be as bright and painless as her past. She had no idea that the greatest test of her life was not in a physical sensation, but in the one place she believed she was most invincible, her heart. Life was about to introduce her to a kind of pain she never knew existed, a pain that no laughter could silence and no pride could deflect. Old women on their way to market would pause under the Udala tree, watching her, and whisper, "That girl walks as if the ground was made only for her feet." She was a sight to behold. Young men would invent reasons, any reason at all, just to pass by her father's compound. They hoped for a glimpse of her carrying water from the stream, a clay pot balanced perfectly on her head, her wrapper tied with a kind of careless elegance that seemed impossible to imitate. Her reputation, though, was built on more than just beauty. It was built on a strange kind of invincibility. Her classmates, now young women themselves, carried a memory that had grown with them like a stubborn weed. They remembered being small girls, clutching their bellies in pain each month, while Kim, untouched by it, would simply laugh. Now, whenever she glided between the rows of wooden desks in our hot classroom, a silent ripple would pass through the room. Some girls would lower their eyes, remembering the sting of her childhood mockery. Others stared openly, their gazes a mix of envy and resentment. And Kim, of course, seemed to notice none of it. Or perhaps she just pretended not to. She moved between the benches like a queen surveying subjects who had already bowed. Even our teachers weren't immune to judging her. I remember Mr. Okonkwo, the mathematics master who always wore a frown. He once muttered in the staff room, "That girl carries her head so high, one day it will fall off." Sister Agnes, our kind chemistry teacher, once tried to reach her. She kept Kim back after class. "Kim," she said gently, "intelligence is a gift, but humility is a choice. Please, choose wisely." Kim just smiled her slow, dazzling smile. "Sister," she replied, her voice smooth as silk, "God gave me both the gift and the right to enjoy it." After acing her final senior secondary certificate exams, with that same effortless grace she applied to everything, Kim returned to the village. She was home to wait for her results and prepare for the university life everyone knew was her destiny. The Harmattan wind blew sharp and dry that year, coating everything in a fine layer of red dust, like a silent warning. Kim spent her days visiting tailor shops in town, picking out expensive lace and gelly for the university matriculation she was so sure of. She moved through the market like a visiting celebrity, greeting people with a regal tilt of her chin, accepting their compliments as if they were her birthright. It was on one of those market days that she first noticed Chinedu. He was selling yam and palm oil at his uncle's stall. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms made strong from years of farm work. Unlike the other young men who either stammered or tried to show off whenever Kim passed by, Chinidu was different. He simply looked up, met her eyes calmly, and greeted her by name. "Good afternoon, Nkimdari," he said, using her full name. It was as though he'd known her his whole life. She stopped, genuinely surprised. Most boys either fawned over her or ran away. Chinidu did neither. He just kept weighing yams for Mom and Ngozi while talking to Nkem about the price of fertilizer and the coming planting season. He spoke to her like she was just another person. And something about his quiet confidence, his steadiness, unsettled her pride. At the same time, it drew her in. They started talking more whenever she came to the market. He never praised her beauty, not once. Instead, he asked for her opinion on things. Was cocoyam or yam better for making fufu? Would the new road the government promised ever actually be built? Slowly, almost against her will, Kim found herself lingering longer and longer at his stall. So when he finally asked her father for permission to visit, the whole village was buzzing. Quiet Chinidu and proud Kim, they whispered, "That's like fire and water." But Chinidu was patient. He sat on the low stool in her father's parlor, answering every question with quiet respect. He never once looked intimidated by the compound's new zinc roof or the framed photos of Kim in her school uniform. When Kim herself brought in a tray of kola nut and garden eggs, Chinidu thanked her softly. His eyes were warm, but they weren't worshipful. 8 months later, they were married. It was the Harmattan season again, when the air was cool and perfect for a celebration. Their wedding was the talk of 3 villages. Kim's wrapper was George lace, the color of fresh palm wine, and her coral beads were so plentiful they clinked like tiny bells when she moved. The drummers played until their palms were raw, and old women ululated until their voices grew hoarse. It felt like even the sky approved, holding back the rain that had threatened all week. That night, in their new mud brick house, Kim lay beside her husband, still glowing from the day's festivities. Moonlight streamed through the wooden shutters, painting silver stripes across the new Ankara bedspread. She couldn't help herself. She turned to Chinidu and began the story she'd told 100 times before. "You know, my husband," she began, tracing circles on his chest. "When other girls were rolling on the ground every month, crying for their mothers, I was outside playing 10-10. They called it period pain. I called it weakness. God just skipped me completely." He looked down and said, "This one is special. Let her pass." Chinidu was quiet for so long, and Kim thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, he spoke softly into the darkness. "Kim, I am happy God has been kind to you. But kindness is not the same as immunity. The same God who spares us one pain sometimes allows another, just so we remember we are human. Mocking those who suffered was never fair." She let out a low, confident laugh. "Chinidu, you worry too much. Look at me. I am perfect. No pain has ever touched me, and none ever will. Even childbirth, when it comes, will be easy for me. You'll see." He pulled her closer, but said nothing more. In that silence, Kim felt completely, utterly victorious. The weeks after the wedding were a blur of visitors and gifts. Kim received them like a queen holding court, seated on her new velvet sofa. She decorated the house exactly as she wanted it. In the center, above the table, hung a large mirror framed in gold-colored plastic, perfectly placed so she could admire herself whenever she passed by. Her wedding photographs were everywhere, enlarged and mounted on the walls. Kim laughing, Kim dancing, Kim looking absolutely radiant. Bright Ankara curtains fluttered in the windows like little celebration flags. Every single corner of that house told her story. I am beautiful. I am favored. I am above ordinary suffering. Even Mama Ifioma, who had come to stay with the new couple for a month, watched all of this with a growing sense of unease. One evening, as they were in the backyard pounding egusi together for soup, the older woman decided to try again. "My daughter," she began gently, "this pride you carry, it's a heavy load. I have seen strong trees broken by the wind simply because they refuse to bend. Humility isn't weakness, Kim. It is wisdom." Kim just wiped the sweat from her brow and smiled. "Mama, the trees that bend are the ones that break on the inside. I will stand tall. Nothing can bend me." Mama Ifioma looked at her daughter-in-law for a long, silent moment, then turned back to the mortar and pestle without saying another word. The other women in the village noticed it too. When Kim walked to the stream to fetch water, her wrapper tied high and her water pot balanced on her head with just one hand, as if it weighed nothing at all, some would greet her warmly, but others offered only tight, forced smiles. Behind her back, they would whisper, "Let's just watch." Pride always comes before a fall. But Kim didn't hear any of it. Or maybe she chose not to. She was far too busy planning her perfect life. She'd go to university, maybe even study abroad. She would have well-behaved children who never cried. And her husband, Chinidu, would rise to become a big man, all because of her own shine. Pain, tears, disappointment. Those things were for lesser women, not for her. And then, one ordinary morning, about 6 weeks after the wedding, as the cock crowed and the harmattan haze still hung low over the village, Kim woke up with a strange flutter in her belly. She sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her stomach. She felt it again, a soft, secret little movement, like a fish turning over in a calm lake. She was pregnant. Joy flooded her so completely that she laughed out loud in the quiet room. She rushed to wake Chinidu, shaking him until his eyes fluttered open. "I am carrying your child," she announced, as though she had achieved something no woman in the history of the world had ever done before. He pulled her down beside him, kissing her forehead, his eyes shining with quiet, happy tears. "Nem, God is good," he whispered. And Kim spent the rest of the day singing as she swept the compound, her voice carrying over the walls for everyone to hear. She went to Mama Ifeoma's house first, then visited every aunt and friend she could find within walking distance. And each time she shared her news, she added the same triumphant promise. "You know, even this pregnancy will be easy for me. Morning sickness? Not from Kim. Swollen feet? Never. Pain in childbirth? Huh. I laugh at pain." People smiled and congratulated her, of course, but some of them exchanged knowing glances. Mama Ifeoma just pressed her lips together and prayed silently. In the weeks that followed, Kim's confidence grew right along with her belly. She continued her visits to the market, her head held higher than ever, basking in the admiration of being young, beautiful, married, and now, expecting. She chose the finest Osso oak fabrics for her maternity wrappers, ordered baby things from the big market in Onitsha months in advance, and talked constantly about how her child would be the most brilliant, most beautiful, most favored. Because after all, look at the mother. But beneath that shining, perfect surface, the first tiny cracks were already starting to form. Some mornings, she woke with a strange heaviness in her breasts. Some afternoons, her stomach felt unsettled, though she refused to call it nausea. "It's just hunger," she would tell herself firmly. "Ordinary women vomit. Not me." She didn't tell anyone about the occasional sharp twinge low in her back, or the way her ankles sometimes ached after a long market day. Those were small things, unimportant details. She was in Kim, the untouchable one. A little discomfort was nothing. Still in the quiet of the night, when Chinidu slept soundly beside her, and the moon painted silver stripes across their bed, a new thought sometimes whispered at the very edge of her mind. A thought she would push away as quickly as it came. What if? What if this time is different? But she always answered herself the same way, fierce and certain. Impossible. Pain no fit reach me. And so the months rolled on, her belly rounding like a perfect moon, her pride burning brighter than ever, while deep inside her body, unseen and unstoppable, life was preparing to teach its ancient lesson. Kim had always believed that her body was a kingdom, and she was its absolute ruler. Pain was like a foreign army that had tried to breach the gates many times. Period cramps, headaches, the sting of a cut finger, but it had always been turned back at the border. She had walked through her entire life, certain that the walls of her kingdom would never be breached. And pregnancy, she assumed, would be no different. She would glow. She would carry the baby elegantly. She would deliver with the same effortless grace she showed in everything else. Other women could suffer. She would simply sail above it all. Each time she dismissed them, she had a new excuse ready. The ochre was bad, she'd say, or there was too much Gary in the fufu. Sometimes, she'd blame the baby for kicking early. Anything to avoid facing the truth. But then came the night that would change her world forever. Her husband, Chinidu, had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day of clearing a new patch of land for their yam mounds. And Kim sat alone on a low wooden stool in the parlor. The soft, golden light from the lantern danced across the room, making their new wedding photographs on the wall seem to glow with a life of their own. She was oiling her legs with shea butter, the kind Mama Ifeoma always brought from the village. She found herself smiling at a picture of her dancing at her own wedding. Her head was thrown back in laughter, beads flying in every direction. She looked untouchable, radiant, and free. And then it hit. The first real pain came without any warning at all. It started deep inside her, a feeling like a fist slowly closing inside her womb before it twisted with vicious force. And Kim dropped the small calabash of shea butter. It clattered loudly across the cement floor, spilling the thick yellow cream, which looked like melted gold in the lantern light. She instinctively bent forward, wrapping both arms around her middle as if to hold herself together. A sharp, shocked, almost childish sound escaped her lips before she could stop it. The pain tightened, released for a moment, and then tightened again, even harder this time. It felt as if something inside her was being wrung out, like a wet wrapper being twisted dry. Sweat broke out across her forehead, even though the night air was cool. She tried to stand, but her legs shook so badly she had to sit back down. Chinidu, her voice cracked. Chinidu, come on. He was by her side in moments, bare-chested, his eyes wide with alarm. Kim, what is it? Talk to me. My stomach. It's twisting, like someone is tying a rope inside me and pulling it tight, she gasped. She clutched at him, her nails digging into his arm without her even realizing it. It's burning. Make it stop. Chinidu knelt beside her, gently pressing his hands over hers. Breathe slowly and Kim. In and out. Just like this. He demonstrated, his voice the same calm river it always was, even in the middle of this crisis. It might just be the baby stretching, or maybe something you ate. We'll go to the clinic first thing in the morning. But the morning felt a lifetime away. The pain rolled in relentless waves. There would be 10 minutes of deceptive quiet, then another vicious clamp that left her gasping for air. She tried to lie down on the mat, but it felt like she was lying on a bed of nails. She tried sitting on the stool, but that was no better. Finally, she began to pace the small parlor like a trapped animal, one hand braced against the wall for support, the other cradling the tiny swell of her belly. Between the waves of pain, she wept. Not loud, dramatic tears, but quiet, incredulous ones that slipped down her cheeks, surprising her each time they fell. So this is pain, she whispered to the empty room when Chinidu stepped outside to fetch some water. This small thing, I laughed at. This is what Adora felt every single month. This is what made Ngozi faint behind the school latrine. She remembered herself at 12 years old, standing over her crying classmates, her hands planted firmly on her hips, declaring, "If it pains you so much, why don't you just tell your body to stop?" She remembered the laughter that had followed her words, how proud she had felt of her own strength, her own immunity to such weakness. Now, her own body had turned into a traitor. She let out a short, bitter laugh, which quickly turned into a sob as another wave of pain gripped her. By the time dawn broke, she was completely exhausted. Her eyes were swollen and her wrapper was damp with sweat. Chinidu half carried her to his motorcycle, and they started the bumpy journey to the government clinic in town. Every single jolt of the bike sent fresh fire through her belly. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, determined not to cry out, not in front of the other Okada men who greeted them along the dusty road. The clinic was already overflowing with people. There were women with huge bellies, women with tiny babies tied securely to their backs, and children coughing in the corners. And Kim sat stiffly on the hard wooden bench, her legs pressed tightly together, willing the pain to stay quiet just until the nurse finally called her name. When her turn came, they laid her on a narrow examination bed. The doctor pressed a cold ultrasound probe against her skin, and Kim held her breath. The grainy screen flickered to life. A tiny shape pulsed there, a head, a body, for limbs no longer than grains of rice, and a heartbeat, fluttering like a trapped moth. "See?" The doctor smiled, turning the screen so she could get a better look. "Your baby is perfect. A strong heartbeat, good position. What you are feeling is normal round ligament pain. The uterus is growing faster than the ligaments can stretch. Some women feel almost nothing. Some feel plenty. You, my dear, are one of the unlucky ones who feel it well. Normal." The word hit her like a slap across the face. This fire inside of me is normal?" Her voice was small, barely a whisper. The doctor just shrugged kindly. "Welcome to pregnancy, madam. Take paracetamol when it's bad. Rest. Warm baths. It will pass." The ride home was silent. She clung to Chinidu's back, the tears now drying stiff on her cheeks. Normal. Other women endured this every day and still managed to smile, to cook, to carry water on their heads. And she had mocked them for complaining about so much less. That night, the pains returned, as if they were mocking her in turn. She lay rigid in bed beside Chinidu, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too deeply. When sleep finally came, it was a thin, restless sleep, full of anxious dreams. In them, she was running from something she couldn't see, and every step she took sent knives through her belly. Morning after morning, she woke up to the same heaviness, the same unpredictable stabs of pain. Some days were gentle, almost kind, offering a brief respite. But on other days, the pain sat on her like a heavy stone. One afternoon, when I was alone, I knelt before the small wooden crucifix my mother hung above our door, and I finally spoke aloud. God, I am sorry. I thought I was special. I thought you loved me more. Now I see. You were only waiting. Please, teach me gently. I'm listening now. The pains didn't disappear. Far from it. But something inside me began to bend. As the weeks went on, and my belly grew rounder, a quiet dread grew louder in my heart. If the first trimester could reduce me to tears in the night, what lessons were waiting in the second and third? I'd touch the curve of my stomach with trembling fingers and whisper to the child inside, half plea, half promise. Be gentle with your mother, little one. She is learning how to be human, and she is very, very afraid. By the time I entered my second trimester, the mild discomfort was gone. It was replaced by something far darker, far more vicious. What started as occasional sharp twinges deep in my womb soon became persistent, stabbing pains. It felt like something alive and angry was trying to tear its way out from the inside. I felt it constantly, even when I stood perfectly still in the market, pretending to bargain for tomatoes while my knees threatened to buckle. At night, the pricks turned into hot, relentless jabs that radiated across my entire belly. Some evenings, I'd lift my wrapper and stare in horror at my stomach. Faint raised spots, tiny hard peaks that rose and fell with each breath, like something was trying to punch its way out from under my skin. I'd never seen anything like it. My body, which I had always trusted, had become a traitor. One humid evening, I was sitting on the veranda, clutching my stomach. Sweat was beading on my forehead. Mama, Mama Ifioma. I called out, my voice cracking. It's coming out. Something sharp is coming out of my stomach. My mother rushed outside, her face etched with worry. She knelt beside me, taking my trembling hands in hers. Kim, my child, breathe. Just breathe slow. The baby is growing big, that is all. Your skin is stretching, your bones are shifting. Every woman who has carried life has felt this pressure. I shook my head, tears spilling down my cheeks. No, Mama, you don't understand. This is different. It's not just pressure. It feels like knives inside me, like thorns growing. I have never felt anything close to this kind of pain before. My husband, Chinidu, came and rested a hand on my shoulder. My heart, he said softly. We will get through this. The baby is kicking strong. You are not alone in this, Kim. But his words floated past me like smoke. I could barely hear him over the pounding in my womb. Each day, the pain grew hungrier. Mornings that used to start with me singing now began with me curled on my side, biting a pillow so the neighbors wouldn't hear me cry. Walking to the kitchen felt like crossing a desert. The 6 steps to our bedroom left me gasping for air. I spent long hours alone on the bed, one hand always pressed against the hard, angry bulge of my belly. And in those silent hours, my mind traveled back to every time my friends whispered about their period pain. I remembered how I would laugh, bright and careless. Is it not just small blood? See how you people behave. Me, I never feel anything. My own comes and goes like a breeze. God just favored me. I had said it so proudly, enjoying the envy in their eyes. I had felt untouchable, chosen. Now, the memory burned worse than the pain itself. Oh God, I whispered into the empty room. This is what they felt, and I laughed at them. Shame crawled over my skin like ants. Even the neighbors, who used to call me Kim the Fearless, began to notice. Mama Ngozi brought palm wine mixed with bitter herbs. Kim, drink this. It will calm the baby. Any comfort came with warm leaves for my belly. See this girl that used to dance till morning, she said kindly, but her eyes held a glint of satisfaction. Now pregnancy has humbled her like the rest of us. In the evenings, I'd hear the women talking under the mango tree. You see that in Kim? The one that used to boast that pain can never catch her? See how she is suffering now. Pregnancy does not know who is strong. Their words drifted through my window. I heard everyone. I just pulled the wrapper over my head and cried harder. The spikes inside me grew worse. Some nights I'd wake up screaming, feeling like tiny claws were ripping through me. I began to dread the dark, begging Chinidu to leave the light on, to sit beside me until dawn. And he did, stroking my back, his own eyes red from lack of sleep. One particularly bad night, when I thought I might actually die from the pain, my mother came into the room. She sat beside the bed and took my hand. "Kimbima," she said gently, using my full name. "Look at me." I turned my tear-streaked face to her. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "Pain doesn't send a message before it visits. It doesn't care if you boast, if you laugh at another person. One day, it will knock on your door. And when it comes, it will teach you things you can't learn in a university." My lips trembled. "Mama, I am sorry. I was proud. I was foolish. I looked down on my friends, and now look at me. I am worse than all of them." She shook her head. "No, my child. You are not worse. You are just human, like all of us. The same blood that runs in their veins runs in yours. Never forget this lesson. When this baby finally comes, remember how you felt tonight. And when you see another woman crying from pain, any kind of pain, do not laugh. Sit with her. Hold her hand. Say, 'Sister, I know.' That is the only thing pride cannot buy." The second trimester stretched on like an endless harmattan night, dry, relentless, unforgiving. Her laughter, her careless pride, her illusions of invincibility, all of it had been stripped away layer by layer, until she lay bare, small, trembling, waiting for deliverance. Some mornings she would place both hands on her belly and beg the child inside her. "Please, my baby, be gentle with your mother. I am learning. I am learning." And deep in her heart, in the quiet place where truth now lived, she knew that the worst was still yet to come. The third trimester loomed like a gathering storm, dark clouds rolling in from the horizon. But for the first time in her life, Kim was no longer afraid of being humbled. She was ready to bend, to break if she must, because she had finally learned the oldest lesson of womanhood. Strength is not the absence of pain. It is the courage to feel every stab and still choose love. As Kim crossed the invisible threshold into her third trimester, the world narrowed to the size of her swollen belly and the fire that lived inside it. The sharp twinges and strange spikes that had tormented her earlier were no longer visitors. They had moved in permanently, taken over the house of her body, and redecorated it with knives. Every single movement became a negotiation with agony. Rolling over in bed was no longer a simple shift of weight. It was a slow, deliberate military operation that left her gasping and clutching the mattress. Standing up from a chair required both hands braced on the armrests, a deep breath, and a silent prayer that her spine would not snap under the pressure. Even breathing felt dangerous. Each inhale seemed to press the baby harder against whatever raw nerve endings now lived just beneath her skin. The mysterious raised peaks on her stomach had grown bolder. In the harsh light of the bathroom bulb, she could see them clearly now. Angry, pointed ridges that rose like tiny mountain ranges whenever the baby stretched or turned. When she traced them with trembling fingers, they felt hard as bone. Some nights, she was certain the child was trying to claw its way out early, impatient to escape the cramped darkness and damn the consequences for its mother. One rain-soaked night in the 7th month, when thunder rolled across Agita Lake like the gods themselves were angry, the pain reached a new height. It started low in her back, a dull ache that blossomed suddenly into white-hot fire that shot down her legs and up into her ribs. Kim screamed, a raw, animal sound that brought Chinidu running from the parlor where he had been pretending to watch football. "Chinidu, it's tearing me apart. Make it stop. Please God, make it stop." She collapsed onto all fours on the cool tile floor, rocking back and forth, tears and sweat mingling on her face. Her husband dropped to his knees beside her, strong arms wrapping around her shaking body. "I'm here, Kim. I have you. Breathe, just breathe through it." His voice cracked despite his efforts to stay calm. He had watched her suffer for months now, growing thinner in the face while her belly grew monstrously large, and the helplessness was eating him alive. But breathing was impossible when it felt like her entire pelvis was being pried apart by giant hands. In the quiet moments between contractions, because that's what these waves of pain had become, even though the baby was not yet ready, Kim's mind wandered to dark places. She remembered secondary school, when her classmates would miss classes or lie on the dormitory floor during their periods, and how she would roll her eyes and call them dramatic. She remembered university, when her roommate Ada would curl into a ball every month, heating pad pressed to her stomach, and Kim would laugh. Is it not just small blood? See how you're behaving as if armed robbers caught you. She remembered her cousin's wedding 2 years ago, when the bride had to be helped to the bathroom twice during the reception because of cramps, and Kim had whispered to another cousin, "All this walla for ordinary period? Thank God I'm not like these people." Now she would have given anything, to trade this pain for 1,000 periods. She understood now with the clarity that only suffering can bring that what she had dismissed as a small thing was actually a monthly crucifixion that her friends had endured in silence while smiling for photographs and dancing at parties. "Mama," she whispered one afternoon when Mama Ifioma found her sobbing quietly in the darkened bedroom. "I was wicked. I was proud and wicked. All those girls, all those years, they were dying inside and I laughed. Now look at me." One particularly brutal evening in the 36th week, the harmattan wind howled, and the pressure in Kim's pelvis felt like she was carrying a bag of cement between her legs. She sat on the veranda steps and wept without making a sound. Her wrapper was soaked with tears and sweat. Her ankles had disappeared into swollen feet that barely fit her slippers. "God," she whispered into the darkness, her hands cradling the hard dome of her stomach. "I have learned. I swear by everything I am, I have learned. Please let this baby come now. I cannot bear one more day of this fire. I am ready to push, to tear, to bleed. Anything but this waiting. This endless waiting while something eats me alive from inside." Chinita found her there and carried her, back to bed. Her weight was nothing in his arms compared to the weight of his worry. He laid her down gently and climbed in behind her, molding his body to hers, one hand resting protectively over the baby that had become both their blessing and their tormentor. "Soon," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Very soon now, my love. The doctor said any day? Hold on just a little longer. You are the strongest woman I know." But Kim no longer believed in strength. She had learned the truth. There is no strength that pain cannot break, no pride that suffering cannot humble. The only thing that remained when everything else was stripped away was love. The stubborn, quiet love that kept Chinidu beside her night after night. The fierce love that grew inside her despite the agony of carrying it. The ancient love of mothers and daughters that flowed between her and her own mother as they waited together for deliverance. The agony continued, day after day, night after endless night. False contractions came and went like cruel jokes. Her back ached constantly. Her breasts leaked at the slightest touch. Sleep was a distant memory. Food was the enemy. Even water felt heavy in her stomach. But somewhere in the 39th week, something shifted. The pain changed. It was no longer just pressure and stabbing, but a deep, rhythmic tightening that wrapped around her entire torso like a fist closing and opening. At first, she was afraid to hope. But when the fist began closing every 10 minutes, then every 7, then every 5, she understood. She turned to Chinidu in the darkness, her eyes wide with terror and triumph. "It's time," she whispered. And as the first real contraction ripped through her body, worse than anything she had felt before, a promise of the final trial to come, and Kim smiled through her tears. The storm had reached its peak. Deliverance was finally coming. The agony before deliverance had done its work. It had broken her open completely, emptied her of pride, and filled her with understanding. Whatever came next, the tearing, the screaming, the blood, she would meet it not as in Kim the proud, not as in Kim the fearless, but as in Kim the human, in Kim the mother, in Kim who finally, truly, deeply understood. The storm broke on a Tuesday night in the middle of the rainy season, when the sky over Agueda Lake split open and poured water like judgment. Kim had been restless all day, pacing the small sitting room in circles, one hand pressed low on her back, the other supporting the impossible weight of her belly. The false contractions had teased her for weeks, but these new ones were different, deeper, meaner, wrapping around her torso like iron bands pulled tighter and tighter by unseen hands. At first, she tried to hide it. She didn't want to raise the alarm too early. She sat on the plastic chair in the parlor, biting her lip until it bled, counting the minutes between each wave on the old wall clock Chinidu's father had left them. When the gap shrank to 4 minutes, then 3, she could no longer pretend. "Chinidu," she called, her voice small and afraid in a way he had never heard before. "It is time." He dropped the phone he was using to speak with his brother in Lagos and ran to her. The hospital bag had been packed for weeks, sitting by the door like a silent witness. He helped her into the car as rain drummed hard on the roof. He drove through flooded streets while Kim rocked back and forth in the passenger seat, moaning low in her throat with every contraction. The maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and wet cement. The nurses moved quickly when they saw her, face twisted, wrapper soaked with sweat and rainwater, legs already trembling. They wheeled her straight to the delivery room while Chinidu followed, clutching her hand like a lifeline. The pain was no longer just pain. It was a living thing, a wild animal trying to tear its way out of her body. Each contraction lifted her off the bed, arched her back, and forced a scream from her throat that sounded nothing like the bright, confident Kim anyone knew. She pushed when they told her to push, bore down with everything she had, but the baby refused to descend. Hours bled into each other. The fluorescent lights above her blurred into white suns. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. She vomited into a plastic bowl someone held. She begged, first God, then the nurses, then Chinidu, then no one at all, for it to be over. I can't do this anymore," she sobbed, her voice shredded raw. "Just cut me open. Please, take the baby out. I am dying." Chinidu's shirt was soaked with her tears and his own. He had not let go of her hand once, even when her nails dug crescents into his skin. "You are doing it, my love. You are almost there. I see the head, just a little more." But the monitor began to beep faster. The baby's heartbeat, strong for so long, started to falter. The doctor's face changed. "We're losing descent. Fetal distress. We have to go to theater now." Everything happened in a rush of green scrubs and shouted instructions. Someone shoved papers at Chinidu to sign. Someone else pushed him out of the way. And Kim, half conscious, felt herself being lifted onto another bed, wheels rattling down a corridor that smelled of blood and fear. She was wheeled into the operating theater, a cold, sterile room that felt a world away from the warmth of Chinidu's hand. The bright lights were blinding. The anesthesiologist spoke to her in a calm, soothing voice, but his words were just a buzz against the roar of her own terror. She felt a prick in her back, a strange coldness spreading up her spine. Then, nothing. The world went numb from the waist down. A green curtain went up, separating her from the work of the doctors, separating her from her own body. She couldn't feel the pain anymore, but a different kind of agony took its place, the agony of helplessness. She could only lie there, listening to the metallic clink of instruments and the muffled, urgent voices of the surgical team. Chinidu wasn't there. She was utterly alone, a passive vessel in her own life's most defining moment. She stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them, tears tracing silent paths down her temples and into her hair. Was her baby okay? Would she ever hold her child? Then, after what felt like an eternity of suspended time, she heard it. A cry, not a weak, struggling sound, but a full-throated, furious wail that cut through the clinical hum of the room. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The doctor's voice, now light and triumphant, floated over the curtain. "Congratulations, Mama. It's a girl." A girl. And Kim closed her eyes, and a single, profound sob escaped her. Her daughter was here. She was safe. A nurse brought the baby, wrapped tightly in a white cloth, and held her near Kim's face. She was so small, so perfect. Her face was wrinkled and red, her tiny fists balled up in protest. And Kim reached out a trembling hand and touched her daughter's cheek. In that single touch, all the pain, the fear, the weeks of agony, it all dissolved. It was worth it. Every second of it was worth it. The pride she had lost was replaced by a love so vast it felt like it could fill the entire universe. She wasn't just Kim anymore. She was a mother. Later, in the recovery room, Chinidu sat by her bed, holding her hand again. In his other arm, he cradled their daughter, who was now sleeping peacefully. His face was etched with exhaustion, but his eyes shone with a joy that mirrored her own. "She looks just like you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. And Kim looked at her husband, at her child. Her last memory was the cold kiss of the anesthetic mask, Chinidu's voice promising he would be waiting. Then, nothing. She woke up to a quiet room, the storm outside now a gentle rain. A dull, heavy ache pulsed through her body, a body that had been cut open and sewn back together. Her throat was raw, her legs felt like lead. And then she heard it, a tiny, fierce cry from the corner. A nurse approached, holding a bundle wrapped in white hospital cloth. "Madam, congratulations. You have a daughter, a very strong girl." They placed the baby in her arm, and in that moment, the world stopped. She was perfect. Dark, damp curls, a mouth like a tiny rosebud, and fists no bigger than walnuts, clenched in protest against the cold, bright world. When her daughter's eyes fluttered open, and Kim saw her own eyes staring back, and something inside her chest cracked wide open. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable. She couldn't even lift a hand to wipe them away. The nurse left them alone. Chinidu slipped into the room, his eyes red, his shirt wrinkled, the terror of the last few hours still etched on his face. He knelt by her bed and rested his forehead against hers. "She is beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother." And Kim tried to speak, but her throat was tight. When the words finally came, they were a fragile whisper. "Chinidu, I saw them. While I was under, or maybe it was a dream, all the girls I used to laugh at. Adora from secondary school, Chioma from university, my cousin Amaka, even the ones I didn't know. They were standing around the operating table, watching me scream. And none of them were laughing. They were crying with me." Chinidu said nothing, just pressed his lips to her knuckles. "I thought I was special," she continued, her voice trembling. "I thought pain would never touch me because I was stronger, better, favored. I wore that pride like a crown. And today it was ripped from my head and thrown into the fire. I have never felt so small, Chinidu. So weak. So ordinary." He shook his head gently. "No, my love. Today you were the strongest woman in the world. You fought. You brought life. That is not ordinary." And Kim looked down at the tiny girl now sleeping against her breast, her little body rising and falling with each breath. "I will never laugh at another person's pain again," she said, and the words felt like a vow carved into stone. Not period pain, not childbirth, not a headache, not heartbreak. Nothing. If anyone ever tells me they are suffering, I will sit beside them and say, "I know. I remember." The days in the hospital were a slow, hazy blur. She learned to sit up again, to stand, to walk the few steps to the bathroom with a pillow clutched against the angry red line across her abdomen. The cesarean scar was a constant, throbbing reminder that her body had been opened to save 2 lives. Visitors came and went, her mother-in-law weeping with joy, neighbors bringing gifts, friends from university who stared at this noon Kim. Quiet, gentle, her eyes soft with something that wasn't there before. When she finally returned home, the women of the compound gathered under the mango tree to celebrate. Someone started the old joke, "Ah, and Kim the fearless. Now you have joined the League of Ordinary Women." They all expected her usual sharp comeback. But instead, Kim smiled, slow and sweet, and opened her arms. "Yes," she said simply, "I have joined, and it is the greatest honor of my life." Years passed. Her daughter, named Adaku, grew old enough to understand stories. Kim would sit her on her lap and tell her the truth. "I used to think I was a girl who felt no pain," she would say, her fingers gently tracing the faint silver line low on her belly. "But your birth taught me that I am a woman who can survive any pain. And that is so much better." And so, in the evenings, when young girls from the neighborhood would gather on her veranda, complaining about cramps or heartbreak or the small, daily cruelties of life, and Kim never laughed. She would brew them hot tea with ginger and cloves, press warm cloths to their stomachs, and tell them softly, "Cry if you need to. Scream if you must. I have cried. I have screamed. And I am still here. So will you be?" The girl who once believed herself untouchable had been shattered and rebuilt into something far stronger. A woman who understood that true power isn't in never falling, but in rising every time you fall, and in helping others rise too. Every night, she held her daughter close, feeling that fierce little heartbeat against her own scarred chest. and whispered the same promise into the darkness. I will never forget. And because I remember, I will always be kind. The storm had passed. The awakening had come. And Kim, once proud and untouched by pain, had finally become whole. This story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can become our greatest sources of compassion. True strength isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what we do with it. It's about how we use our scars to understand and heal others. If you've ever felt broken, remember Kim. Remember that you can be rebuilt, stronger and kinder than before. Seasons turned in Agueda the way they always had. The dry, whispering Harmattan wind gave way to heavy rains that turned the red earth into rivers. Then came the gentle heat that coaxed mangoes into ripeness. The lake kept its ancient shimmer. Fishermen cast their nets at dawn, and the smell of frying plantain and pepper soup drifted from every home. To an outsider, it seemed as if nothing had changed. But for Kim, everything had. Her body carried the evidence. A thin, silver line ran low across her belly, a map of where the surgeons had brought her daughter, Ataku, into the world. Her breasts were fuller, sometimes aching with milk. Her hips had widened, and her walk had slowed into the deliberate sway of a woman who now measured every step against memory. When she bent to pick up a bucket, a small, internal tug reminded her that some wounds never fully heal. And yet, she wore these marks like medals. She spent long hours on the veranda, on the same wooden bench where she had once sat clutching her stomach in agony. Now, Attica lay asleep against her chest, a tiny fist curled around the edge of Nkem's wrapper, her breath a soft, warm puff against her mother's neck. Nkem rocked slowly, humming old lullabies her own mother had sung, watching the world move past. Women passed carrying firewood or water. Some were heavy with child, others limped from the familiar monthly ache. Before, Nkem would have looked away, or perhaps even laughed under her breath. Now, she watched them with soft, understanding eyes. One afternoon, a young girl doubled over on the path, clutching her stomach. Nkem didn't hesitate. She shifted Attica to her hip, walked over, and knelt in the dust beside her. Enenikidu? Is it the monthly visitor? She asked gently. The girl, no more than 15, nodded through her tears. Nkem placed a hand on her back, rubbing slow circles, just as Mama Ifioma had once done for her. Come, sit for a little while. It will pass. Breathe with me, slow, slow. You are not dying, even if it feels like it. I know. I thought I would die too once. The girl looked up, surprised. Everyone in the village knew Nkem's story now. It had spread through the compounds like Harmattan fire. Haunting Nkem, is it true you used to laugh at people when they had cramps? Nkem's smile was a mix of sadness and kindness. It is true. I was foolish. I thought pain skipped some people, that we were special. Then I carried your small sister here. She tilted her head toward Attica, and pain nearly finished me. It taught me better than any teacher in school. So cry if you want. But know this, you are stronger than you feel right now. Word of her gentleness spread even faster than word of her suffering ever had. Young girls began to seek her out. They came after school, after market, after church, sitting on her veranda steps with hot water bottles pressed to their bellies. They shared their fears, that the pain meant something was terribly wrong with them, that they would never be able to carry children, that no man would want a wife who cried every month. Nkem listened to each one without interrupting. Then, she would tell them the truth. Pain is not a curse, she would say, pouring ginger tea into enamel cups. It is a language. Your body is speaking to you. Listen to it. Rest when it asks for rest. Drink warm things. One day, when it is time to bring life, this same body will know exactly what to do, even when it feels like it is breaking. I promise you. Her old friends noticed the deepest change. At the August meeting, when the women gathered under the Udala tree to share money and gossip, someone started the familiar teasing. Look at Nkem the fearless, now carrying a baby on her back like an ordinary mama. Before her pregnancy, Nkem would have fired back a sharp reply that left the whole circle roaring with laughter. Now, she only smiled, shifted Attica higher on her back, and said quietly, Yes, ordinary mama. And I have never been happier to be ordinary. The women fell silent. Then, one by one, they began to nod. They saw it in her eyes, the quiet authority that comes only from walking through fire and coming out the other side, still walking. Even Mama Ifioma, who had prayed for this change for years, sometimes just sat and watched her daughter in wonder. One evening, as they shelled egusi seeds together in the backyard, the older woman spoke softly. Kim, I used to fear that pride would kill you one day. Now I see that life only wanted to teach you, not kill you. See how gentle you have become. See how people now come to you for comfort. This is the real blessing. Kim's eyes filled with tears. Mama, I wish I had listened sooner. All those years I wasted laughing. I can never give them back to the girls I hurt, but I can spend the rest of my life making it right. And she did. When her cousin Amaka, whom she had once mocked mercilessly during their university days for missing lectures because of cramps, came home for Christmas, Kim went to her first. She carried a basket of fresh utazi leaves and a bottle of the same herbal mixture Mama Ngozi had once brought for her. Amaka, she said, kneeling in the sitting room like a small child, forgive me. I was wicked. I did not know. Amaka stared for a long moment, then pulled her into a fierce hug, both of them crying. I knew one day life would collect its school fees from you. She laughed through her tears. But see how beautifully you have paid. Chinidu, her husband, watched all of this with quiet pride. At night, when Atiko finally slept and the house was still, he would pull Kim close and trace the scar on her belly with tender fingers. You are more beautiful now than the day I married you, he whispered one evening. She laughed softly. Because I am fat and slow? No, he replied. Because your heart is wide open. Before, you were sharp like a new knife, beautiful, but dangerous to touch. Now, you are like the lake at evening, deep, calm, and holding light for everyone. Years had slipped by like quiet water under the bridge since the night the doctors cut and Kim opened to save her daughter. Kayamika, whom everyone now called Ada because she was truly the daughter of wealth, a wealth measured not in money, but in joy, was already 5 years old. She was a whirlwind of tight curls, gap-toothed smiles, and endless questions. She chased chickens across the Red Earth compound, sang high life songs in a voice too big for her small body, and climbed mango trees with the fearless certainty that her mother would always be waiting below to catch her if she fell. Kim herself had changed beyond recognition. The sharp-edged beauty that once turned heads in the market was still there, but it had softened, deepened, like a blade that had been tempered in fire. People no longer spoke of Kim the Fearless with teasing admiration. They spoke of Mama Ada with something closer to reverence. Her story had become a legend in Agueda. Mothers told it to daughters who boasted they would never feel pain. Teachers told it to girls who teased classmates for staying home during their periods. Even the men knew it, and some of them began to speak more gently to their wives. Kim had become the person the community turned to when words of comfort were needed. At naming ceremonies, at women's meetings, at the health center during antenatal days, Kim's voice rose calm and steady above the rest. I used to think pain was for weak people. She would begin, and the circle would fall silent because everyone knew what came next. I bragged that my body was different. I laughed at my friends, at my cousins, even at strangers. Then God sent me one small girl. At this point, she would lift Ada onto her lap, and the child would beam, unaware she was the main character in the story. And that small girl nearly finished me. She taught me, with every kick and every scream, that pain is not a punishment. It is a teacher. And the lesson is simple. Nobody is above it, and nobody should walk through it alone. Tears would glisten in the eyes of the listeners, because every woman there had her own secret scar, her own night of thinking she would die in childbirth, her own months of bleeding and crying that nobody saw. And for the first time, many of them felt seen. Kim no longer hurried through the market with her chin high and her laughter loud. She walked slowly now, greeting everyone by name, stopping whenever she spotted a girl bent back or a hand pressed to a stomach. One hot afternoon, under the blazing Harmattan sun, she saw 16-year-old Chinaza sitting on an upturned crate behind the tomato stalls. Her face was pale, her knees drawn up, and she was rocking slightly. The old Kim would have walked past without a second thought, maybe even with a dismissive glance. But the new Kim, Mama Ada, stopped. She walked over, her own shopping basket forgotten, and sat down on the dusty ground beside the crate. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat, a silent presence offering solidarity. Finally, Chinaza whispered, her voice tight with shame. It is just my monthlies, Mama Ada. It is nothing. And Kim reached out and placed a cool hand on the girl's arm. It is not nothing, she said softly. Pain is never nothing. Do you want me to sit with you for a while? Chinaza looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude, and nodded. And Kim stayed there for nearly an hour, simply being present, until the worst of the cramps subsided. In that small act of kindness, a cycle was broken. Another girl learned she didn't have to suffer in silence. One sunset, as the sky turned the same brilliant orange it had been the night, and Kim first felt the spikes in her womb. She sat on the veranda with Attiku on her lap. The little girl was tracing the faint, silvery scar on her mother's stomach with curious fingers. "Mummy, what is this mark?" she asked. And Kim kissed her forehead. "That is where the doctors opened me to bring you out safely, my love. And it is where life opened me to bring kindness in." Attica looked up, her eyes wide with wonder. "Will I have one too when I grow up?" "Maybe," and Kim smiled. "But marks are not only on the body. Some of the deepest ones are in the heart. Promise me something, Ada." "Anything, Mummy. When you grow and you see someone crying from pain, any kind of pain, you will never laugh. You will sit beside them. You will say, 'I am here.' That is how we heal the world, one kind heart at a time." Attica nodded solemnly and wrapped her small arms around Kim's neck. In that moment, Kim felt the circle complete. The girl who had once believed herself above suffering had become the woman who carried suffering's lesson like a torch, lighting the path for every daughter, sister, and friend who would come after her. The lake kept shimmering in the distance. The children kept laughing in the fields. The plantains kept frying in the kitchens. Life in Agueda rolled on, unchanged and yet forever changed, because one woman had learned that true strength is not in never feeling pain, but in never again letting someone feel it alone. And in the quiet evenings, when the harmattan wind whispered through the mango trees, Kim would close her eyes and give thanks, not for the absence of pain, but for the presence of understanding. The harshest teacher had given her the greatest gift. She had survived the storm. She had awakened. And now, she carried the lesson forward, not as a burden, but as a blessing for the rest of her days. Kim saw the girl, Chinaza, doubled over in the market dust. Without a second thought, she knelt beside her, not caring about her new wrapper. "Monthly visitor?" she asked softly. Chinaza nodded, too ashamed to speak. Kim pulled out a small sachet of herbs. "Drink this with warm water when you get home," she said, "and lie down. The world will wait." The girl looked at her, confused. "But, Auntie Kim, people say you used to call cramps an excuse for lazy girls." Kim's laugh was warm and low. "People say true. I was a fool with a loud mouth. Life taught me a hard lesson. Now, I'm just trying to help others pass the same class a little more gently." She stayed with Chinaza, fanning her and telling her stories, until the worst of the pain passed. Chinaza hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Auntie. I was even ashamed to cry in front of my own mother." And Kim replied, "Never be ashamed of what your body does to keep you alive. Be ashamed only if you let someone else cry alone." Word spread like wildfire. By Sunday, the story had traveled all through Agueda. Soon, more girls started showing up on Kim's veranda after school. Some were sent by their mothers. Others came on their own, bringing small gifts, a handful of groundnuts, a few cubes of sugar, even a single orange. And Kim accepted every offering with gratitude. She would brew tea, tell stories, and teach them practical things: how to fold cloth into pads, how to breathe through pain, and most importantly, how to speak up when they were suffering. She started a small Thursday circle under her mango tree. There were no speeches, no sign-ups, just a mat in the shade, a pot of ginger tea always simmering, and an open invitation for anyone whose body was teaching them a hard lesson that day. Sometimes 2 girls came, sometimes 20. And Kim never turned anyone away. Her husband, Chinidu, watched all this with quiet wonder. One night, he traced the faint scar on her belly and whispered, "Do you know you've become the woman our mothers prayed we would marry?" She just laughed and swatted his hand away. "I'm only trying to balance the account. My mouth caused a lot of pain before. Now I use it to heal." One evening, Mama Ifioma, the woman who had helped her during her own difficult pregnancy, came to visit. She brought a beautiful wrapper, the kind worn for important occasions. "This is for the day they make you a leader in the Women's Council," she said, her eyes shining. "Because that day is coming. You have turned your shame into medicine for the whole community. That is what elders do." Years passed. Ada and Kim's daughter started school. The Thursday circle continued to grow. Kim never asked for money or recognition. She just kept showing up with her tea, her stories, and her belief that no girl should ever feel small because her body hurt. One day, a journalist from the state radio station came to Aguda looking for stories of women making a difference. She found Kim under the mango tree, surrounded by a crowd of girls, all sharing, laughing, and crying together. The journalist recorded their stories, her own voice trembling with emotion. 3 weeks later, Kim's gentle voice filled radios all across the state. Pain is not the enemy, she said. Pride is. When we stop pretending we are above suffering, we make space to hold each other inside it. That is how we become truly strong. Letters poured in. Schools invited her to speak. An NGO offered to build a women's center in her name. Kim accepted none of the titles or awards. She only asked that the new building have a wide veranda, plenty of shade, and a place to boil water for ginger tea. On the 10th anniversary of the night her daughter Ada was born, the whole community gathered. They brought lanterns, drums, and mountains of food. A wooden sign was unveiled above the new center's gate. It read, Kim's veranda, where no woman cries alone. For the first time in her life, Kim was speechless. She knelt in the dust, forehead to the ground, and wept, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming realization that her deepest shame had become her greatest gift. Later that night, she walked to the quiet shore of the lake. This was the same lake that had witnessed her screams and her despair all those years ago. She pressed a hand to the faint scar on her belly and spoke to the darkness, to the water, to the girl she used to be. Thank you, she whispered, for breaking me open, for teaching me that being human is not a weakness. It is the only strength that matters. A soft breeze stirred the surface of the water, as if the lake itself was nodding in agreement. The proud girl who once believed pain could never touch her was gone. Decades rolled gently over the village of Aguta, like soft waves on the lake's edge. The small footpaths I once knew became tarred roads, and where kerosene lanterns used to flicker, solar lamps now cast a steady glow. The old mango tree, the one where our Thursday circle first gathered, had grown enormous, its branches heavy with both fruit and memories. Yet, amidst all this change, some things remained just as they were. The comforting smell of egusi soup drifting through the evening air, the nightly chorus of crickets, and the way the lake turned to molten gold at sunset. And at the heart of it all, as constant as the lake itself, stood Kim. Her hair was now streaked with gray at the temples, and her steps were a little slower. But her eyes held the same soft fire that had been kindled the night her daughter was born. Kayamika, or Ada, as we all knew her, had grown into a remarkable woman. She had her father's height and his quiet smile, but she carried her mother's unshakable calm. She taught at the new government primary school, and every evening, she'd return home with the sound of children's laughter still in her voice. Ada married a kind man from the next village and had 3 children of her own. But every Thursday, without fail, she would come back to the old family compound to help her mother with the women's circle, a tradition that had never ended. The mat under the mango tree had been replaced countless times over the years, but the ritual was unchanged: ginger tea, honest stories, and the unspoken promise that no one would ever have to cry alone. Kim was no longer just Kim. Most people now called her Mom and Kim, or even I am Kim, mother of all. It was a title she had quietly earned. Women would travel from as far as Owerri and Onitsha just to sit with her, to listen. Health workers brought their nursing students to learn from her about managing pain without medicine, about the psychology of pride, and about the simple, powerful act of holding a woman's hand during labor, making her feel the strength of all her ancestors. The local radio station even started recording her words to broadcast every Mother's Day. And a small, hand-painted sign, made by the school children, was hung on the gate of the women's center that was finally built. It read, Kim's veranda, a place where pain is allowed to speak, and compassion is always the answer. She never grew tired of telling her story, though the way she told it changed over the years. It became slower, with longer pauses, letting the silence do some of the teaching. I was a proud girl, she would begin, her voice so soft that even the babies in the circle would stop fussing to listen. I thought my body was a special case. I mocked my friends when their monthly pain bent them double. I said things I cannot repeat now without feeling shame. Then one small baby, my Ada, decided to teach me better. She would pause, a distant look in her eyes. She stretched me, stabbed me, and broke me open. And when I thought death was a sweeter option than continuing, the doctors cut me to bring her into the world. That night, she'd say, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the circle, I learned 3 truths that have guided every day of my life since. First, pain is not a competitor you can defeat with boasting. Second, pride is a useless shield. It shatters at the first real blow. And third, compassion is the only thing that remains when everything else has been burned away. The women listening, some barely teenagers, others grandmothers themselves, would nod, their eyes shining with unshed tears. Many of them knew the story by heart, but they came anyway because hearing it from Kim's lips felt like receiving a potent medicine for the soul. One Harmattan evening, with the air cool and crisp under a wide, starry sky, the compound was more crowded than usual. Word had spread that Kim was not feeling well. Her knees had been troubling her, and the old cesarean scar ached whenever the weather changed. But still, she insisted on holding the circle outside. They brought her favorite chair out onto the veranda, wrapped a warm shawl around her shoulders, and the circle formed around her just as it always did. Ada sat at her mother's right hand, her own youngest child sleeping peacefully on her lap. Grandchildren and great-nieces and nephews played quietly in the yard. Someone started singing a soft hymn, and soon, other voices joined in, a gentle harmony rising into the night. When the song ended, Kim lifted a hand that trembled slightly. "Today," she said, her voice clear despite its weakness. They danced, they sang, they told stories late into the night under the great mango tree. And on the final day, Kayamika stood where her mother always stood and spoke the words the whole community already knew by heart. My mother used to say pain is a teacher, pride is a thief, and compassion is the only inheritance that grows when you give it away. She left us nothing in the bank, but she left us everything that matters. This circle does not end today. This veranda does not close. As long as one woman still hurts in silence, our work continues. They renamed the center properly that day, the IYLM and Kim Memorial Veranda, a place where pain is allowed to speak and compassion is forever the answer. Years later, decades later, travelers passing through Agueda would still hear children whispering the story. They'd talk about the proud girl who once laughed at pain, the baby who taught her humility with tiny fists, and the woman who turned her own breaking into a bridge so that no one after her would have to cross the river of suffering alone. And on quiet evenings when the lake turned gold and the crickets began their chorus, people swore they could still see her, gray-haired, gentle-eyed, sitting in her favorite chair with a pot of ginger tea steaming beside her, smiling at every woman who came to lay her burden down. The girl who once believed herself above pain had become the woman who made sure no one else ever had to feel beneath it. Her legacy wasn't a building, or a sign, or even the stories told about her. Her legacy was every hand held during labor, every tear wiped during cramps, every young girl who heard the words, "I understand," instead of laughter when her body betrayed her. Her legacy was simply understanding, passed from heart to heart, mother to daughter, generation to generation, like a flame that never, ever goes out. And under the great mango tree, the circle continued, Thursday after Thursday, year after year, long after the woman herself had joined the ancestors. It was proof that the fiercest fire, when met with love, can warm the world forever.